All right, so my name is Amit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about automotive marketplaces today. And there are three things that I'd like to at least have you guys take away from this little 20 minutes they've given me. First one has nothing to do with automotive marketplaces. I'm going to give you a very nice icebreaker for your next meeting, sales meeting. If you have seen that before, if you've heard that before, used that before, you don't have to answer the question I'm going to ask you. The second thing I'm going to do is, if you ever want to buy a car and don't want to deal with it, you can take my email address and I will help you buy a car. And then the third, if time permits, we will talk. You should be able to take a little bit away from what in 20 years I've learned about automotive marketplaces. And who here remembers when you were out in the grocery store and you'd see these classified books, used cars for sale, right? So that and what the progression has been and where it's going to go, we'll talk about that a little bit, what we can learn from that, right? So now to the icebreaker. So there's a log floating on the river, and there are 5 frogs sitting on that log, okay? One of the frogs decides to jump off into the river. How many frogs are left on the log? 4? Still 5. Because the frog decided to jump off, that doesn't mean that the frog jumped off. And so when you talk to people who, in big corporations, that's a good icebreaker if you want to get your sales pitch in. Okay, all right, let me get this clicker here. The other thing is, so Dan, who asked me to speak about automotive marketplaces, said, speak about something that people can take away. And I said, well, this is a big subject, right? Do you want me to talk about retail marketplaces? Do you want me to talk about wholesale marketplaces? And I sent him this question, and the next thing is the topic says retail and wholesale marketplaces. So we'll see what we can do here. I'm going to try to do my best with retail, and there's a few things around subscription marketplaces that I want to share with you. If we have time, we'll do wholesale. Otherwise, we'll talk about that later. So why are we talking about auto again? It's comprised of multiple complex marketplace environments, right? It's so much fun for me to come to situations like these and hear about all these awesome ideas that people have and have executed on. And in the meantime, I am dealing with one of the world's largest, oldest, most antiquated set of marketplaces. So what can we learn from that? Second, it is very large. We'll talk about that. And yes, Mr. Anthony Fox, of course, he's a better speaker than I am, talked about how millennials and that kind of stuff will result in the auto. Yes, there will be change, but it is here to stay in some form. So it's important to kind of see what that means and what opportunities it creates. There are 3 types of auto sales transactions, right? So who here is actually from the auto business? Okay, all right. Well, if I'm going to bore you, I will not have an issue if you stand up and walk out. So the first one is a retail B2C, franchise or used vehicle dealers, sells to a consumer. In exceptional cases, an OEM may sell new vehicles directly to the consumer, but franchise laws in this country generally prevent that, and it's state by state. Wholesale is where a lender or a wholesaler or a fleet company sells to a dealer. So if you have leased a vehicle and you have returned it, then that lender will actually end up selling it to a dealer to sell it to a consumer again. And then private party is the other, consumer to consumer. Private party is it's a big business, it's a complicated business, and nobody really has been able to solve for the transactions in the private party side. I won't even be able to get to wholesale, even though I have slides on it, so I'm not going to talk about private party today. So the US new vehicle sales accounts for about 500 billion. Overall GDP impact is about $1 trillion. There's about 276 million passenger vehicles on the road in the US. 56 million vehicles change hands every year. So it's big, right? 17 million of those are new, and then 39 million plus of those are used in any of those, retail or private party. I'm not talking about wholesale transactions here. 86% of new vehicles are financed or leased, and then average transaction price is about 36,000. It has been going up every year for new cars. And then there are about 18,000 franchise dealers, what we call these are new vehicle dealers, right? The industry overall in the U.S. Employs north of 2 or 2.5 million, just the retail dealers, people in our country. A lot of dealers are the second largest employers in a lot of rural areas outside of the government. So U.S. auto demand trends, right? So we talk a lot about, what's going to with the urbanization and automation and ride sharing, but here's the reality, right? So I apologize for the small font here, but I figured everybody here is smart. It's a VC type conference. I'll be able to talk through it. So this line is the millions of vehicles sold on the new side in the US, and this line is the millions of vehicles sold on the used side. And you can see there is some correlationship here. If used goes down a little bit, new will come up. New goes down a little bit, used might come up. It's all related to pricing, credit, lots of different things, right? So it's not like it's, we've been talking about Lyft, Uber, you've been taking it, people have been developing, Google's been developing all this automated cars and all that good stuff. But this is what is happening. It's going up, right? And if you look at this chart, it really talks about the demand for new vehicle sales forecasted till 2025, right? So you might decide that it's not a single owner sale, but ultimately it'll still be a sale. And just to give you a sense, in 2008, when the world fell off and became flat from round, the new vehicle light sales, the light vehicle sales, so that's the light trucks and cars, was less than 13 million, 2008. So in no way we are coming to that levels, right? So these marketplaces fundamentally, or the transaction demand will be there and will continue to be there for a little bit, right? As Keen said, in the long run we are all dead, so I'll worry about the next 5 years now. So let's talk about retail marketplaces, right? So what drives them? And these marketplaces, just in the US itself, if you look at the revenues in general, they add up to be about $3 to $4 billion. So they're large. And I'm just talking about the retail side of things. One place to get vehicle information, right? So one of the interesting things is if you go to a dealer's website, it's a BMW dealer. Then you have to go to a Mercedes website. It's a Mercedes dealer. They might not have the inventory that you're looking for. Then you have to go find another one. So they actually aggregate all that in one place, right? That is really what the classified thing came from. So aggregated demand, efficient source of customers for dealers. Who here can say, not the auto people, how many dollars a car does a dealer spend to market that car today? 100? 200? They spend about $700, right? So this is an efficient way to get out there. And then conquest and loyalty advertising for OEM brands. This is not a transactional. They have figured out a way to actually sell media. And that's about $500 million in business just in the US itself on those. So if I'm going searching for a new Honda, GM might decide to actually do an advertising on a conquest site as an example, right? And there's a bunch of ancillary services as well. So they have fundamental values that they provide that a single dealer or a single OEM cannot provide when you're looking for choice, when you're looking for inventory, right? So the one big thing with auto is that every car is different. On the new car side, you might say, well, I mean, a red Camry LE is a red Camry LE, but they actually do make a million other, variations of that and packages and this and that. So there's differentiation, and it makes it a very unique type of marketplace. So today, these are the main ones out there. These guys started with the books, Auto Trader. So the basic business models are, I want to research a vehicle, I create a lead, dealer gets that lead. I research a vehicle, I end up creating a lead, but then the dealer doesn't pay me per lead. But if the dealer sells that vehicle, the dealer will pay me a much larger number, a transaction fee. There's a classified listing of inventory that creates a lead, a classified inventory listing that creates a transaction. So the difference is when you're researching a vehicle, you're just literally creating a lead saying, I want a Toyota Camry. I don't really care. I don't know the vehicle identification number yet. But when I'm doing a inventory listing, that's on a specific piece of vehicle, right? And then you have trade-ins too. That is big market as well. And so these are the revenue models that these guys generally have. A subscription fee that a dealer pays, a premium listing fee. So I'm competing against other dealers in my space, right? So how do I get on top of them? Well, pay a little bit more. And then the other one has to pay a little bit more. And the other, it's an unending thing. Transaction fees, TrueCar kind of pushes that. And then media and advertising, as we talked about. What's next for this, right? Everything I told you, all right, great. There are two things that they are trying to solve for right now. And the two items that they're trying to solve for is accurate transaction price and monthly payments, right? And then the other is a path to transaction online with finalization or delivery offline, right? Just deliver the car to me or I'll go pick up the car. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to be sold by anybody. How do I do that, right? So to me, a learning about, fundamental brick and mortar type businesses and putting marketplaces on top of that, it's not just about how pretty you make it. Of course, you have to make it pretty. You may have to make it useful. You have to make it jazzy and sexy. But there are just big issues that you have to think about when you try to solve for a long-term marketplace in that, right? And so David talked about it. If you attended David's, section, but as a car dealer in or a marketplace in Mexico, some of the issues are not solved in the U.S. also. So here are some examples of pretty much the same base vehicle that I went to all these marketplaces and I looked up. They now have what is the fair price. The fair price is like 10%. The range is 10%. You're going to do a transaction online, 10%, that's $3,000. And some other site says it's $40,000. Some other site says it's, $57,000. I don't know how that happens. The range is So why is that, right? So how are you going to actually go from being really a classified into a true transactional marketplace if you don't have price confidence, right? And then the next thing is path to a transaction online. But now is the time to do it. So this chart talks a little bit about, it's a little complicated chart, but I'll try to explain it. What it does is it looks at a company called Carvana. Everybody here probably has heard of Carvana, might have used it. It's a vehicle. It's a company where it does used vehicles right now. You basically buy it from them. You don't have to do this hassle, all that stuff. They have these so-called vending machines that I find pretty interesting near the highways. And then you have a 5-day return guarantee. They help you with financing. They have their own, so they make it very easy. That's Carvana. And then here are the other public large groups in the United States, very large groups, AutoNation, Sonic. AutoNation's got Tony, what do you think, 300 stores maybe, something like that, 280? So big stuff. And if you look at SPDR, XRT, that is a benchmark of retail. And if you look at the stock prices, in 18 versus 19, same period, you look at, if the XRT basically held flat about 1%, all these other dealers have gone down, and look at what happened with Carvana. It's a different model, right? So one of the things is a different model is required. The demand will be there, but a different model is required. The market actually rewards that, and there's a reason for it. In an Edmunds weekly survey, 33% of consumers said they'd rather go to the DMV or do their taxes versus go to a dealer, right? But here's the challenge, right? And how do we solve for it? And those of you who are not from auto and are thinking about other marketplaces, ultimately to unlock value in long term, find issues that you can really solve for like that, because then you will become a billionaire, right? If I can solve for this, I will become a billionaire, right? So there are 4 areas here that typically, create that issue with pricing, right? And if you can't do pricing, you really can't do a transaction online, right? First is VIN level option and package content. So this is just a little piece of what we call a Monroe label. If you ever bought a car, you'll get that big sticker, and that that's it, no questions and answers. So I'm definitely not going to wholesale. But really this is the data that is available to anybody who wants to build a marketplace for this Audi, right? Invoice, they also say invoice, but this is a real invoice from a real VIN. And in that, there is about $500 additional that nobody knows about. It's only for that car, only for that invoice that dealer has. How are you going to actually be able to truly and accurately price it when you don't have this data, right? So that's a big issue. You can read the rest of it because I'm running out of time. And then there's much to solve for on the transaction side. There's regulations, complex forms, hundreds of them, right? And then I was going to talk about subscription a little bit. I'm just going to rush through this real quick. Is it done? Somebody had a ding or a okay. Okay. So this is an interesting chart because it basically says, if you have utility, right, minutes, hours, days, months, and years of using the car, and what your average cost per trip should become, right? So if you're going to use a car as a utility function only for minutes, you do ride share, you're probably going to end up paying more per mile versus retail, right? And subscription is somewhere in between. Here's a list of already it's subscription has not even really started, and you have so many players out there. OEMs, dealer programs, third parties, rental cars going in, they all have different value propositions, they all have different prices. And to me, that means will 2020 see the need for a subscription marketplace? Do we need a kayak on top of all of that stuff that can make sense of all these different offerings and ultimately create a pricing and matching of demand and supply in the subscription side, right? Because it's not like Fair or Germain or Volvo really knows what the market clearing price is. They're just taking their base cost and adding some number on top of it and saying what sticks. So I think that's an interesting kind of, Dan said, talk a little bit about what the future is of marketplaces. I think this is one great opportunity. If I was not dying with my current job, I would probably try to do this one. And this one is for next year. Any last questions before he kicks me out? A couple of questions.
Still on the Q&A. Still got moments for Q&A.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we have Q&A.
Okay, please.
Quick question. How do you think about the titling and registration? Is that ultimately ever going to be relinquished by the dealers? I mean, I just don't see how that's going to get captured in marketplaces we've seen. And that's so fundamental to financing.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I'm one of the few guys who actually understands that because I bought a company in titling and registration, and I tried to work with AutoTrader to actually reduce the cost so that C2C, consumer to consumer, could actually be done properly, and it is very hard to do it, right? Each state has a kind of that DMV, and it's got a DMV thing that is different state by state, and linkage, some do tags, some don't do tags. But essentially there are 3 companies in the United States that pretty much have gotten electronic linkages to those states that have the ability to do so, and more states have that. These companies over time will be able to open that up in a form that marketplaces can consume. It's probably 3 to 4 years away. Yeah.
So where do you see the insurance going in these marketplaces when you start talking about Fair and some of the other subscription-based services? I mean, the goal is to start to lose the dealer, direct the consumer from OEM, either on a new standpoint and then used in the secondary market to resell.
I didn't say it was my goal. Is that your goal?
No, but that's the market's goal. Ultimately, if you look at where it's going between Carvana and CarMax, and they'd like a new distribution.
Let me just tell you, Carvana is still a dealer, right?
Yeah.
They need a new distribution. It's not the same as dealer.
Right.
If you get rid of the dealer in the US today, your prices for your vehicles will go up by at least 25%, because the OEMs are built to push that out and reduce costs for that, right? So the dealers will ultimately, so to your question on the insurance, right? The dealers ultimately will have to figure out a new model of how they serve this. They still have facilities, they still have repair, And I have been talking to a lot of dealers who now say, finally, should we also become an insurance broker, right? Because they're looking for additional ways to make money. And then on top of that, I have I advise a company called Mobility in subscription space. They're all working with insurance companies and lenders in this area to figure out new risk models and what are the premiums and all that in that space. So all that is happening, but none of that is truly figured out yet. I don't even know if that was your question, but I feel like I answered something. Sorry about that. Okay.
What do you think of asset-light versus asset-heavy models in car subscription service companies?
You're talking about the weight of the car? Yeah, no, I really do think that asset-heavy models will be hard to actually sustain long-term, right? So if you have a company, I'm not going to name a company, that buys a lot of assets into their balance sheet. And I used to run a company called Automotive Lease Guide once, which actually tries to forecast what the value of the car will be 3 years from now. That's really what is used to actually get your lease payments, right? And Chrysler Capital went out of business because we forecasted the models. Who knows what's going to happen in 3 years? Do you know the gas price? Do you know homes will go down? Like, what's going to happen? So when it goes down, you just get blown out of your balance sheet. So I don't like asset-heavy models. I actually like the model where a dealer will have fleet that can be pushed into the subscription environment, and I'd rather own the kayak on top versus asset-heavy.
So does the dealer end up being the fleet manager
Mhm.
long term?
They're built for that. Okay. Any other questions? You can obviously approach me. And again, if you really want to buy a car for cheap, let me know. I have another company that does that. Thank you.